Welcome to Series 1, Episode 8. This is an archive of live video Q&As streamed online. In this episode, I was joined by Paul Grindley from Winston Solicitors discussing employment law, furlough, redundancies, layoffs and short-time working. How will you exit furlough? Have you considered layoffs? Do you need to restructure? Have you thought about short-time working? What about holidays and annual leave? Should you force all employees to take some leave now? And have you ever been offered a settlement agreement? These were all the questions I put to Paul. Enjoy. Welcome to the Johnny Ross audio experience. I'm Johnny Ross, founder and digital marketing strategist of Fleek Marketing. Each podcast I'll be bringing you an expert to inspire you, to give you some great business growth takeaways, and to get you thinking about marketing and the bigger picture of how businesses can improve, adapt and grow. I look forward to sharing this with you on each podcast, so here we go. Hi, and welcome to another live Q&A. We are in the Coronavirus Yorkshire Business Support Group. Today, we've got Paul Grindley from Winston Solicitors. Delighted to have Paul. Paul, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you very much indeed. So with all these live Q&As, please do ask questions, comment in the chat box for on the comments below, asking any questions you've got on employment law today. We're going to cover everything from furlough to redundancies to annual leave, all sorts of different things. And we're live streaming on YouTube. You can subscribe there, and we're live streaming on Facebook as well. So, Paul, it would be good to just get a bit of background. What's your tell us a bit about yourself and your role at Winston Solicitors?
I've been at Winston Solicitors for almost 5.5 years now. I've been a solicitor for almost 30 years. I'm from Manchester, the other side of the Pennines. I came to Leeds University back in the 80s, so I've been through the decade in terms of work and leisure. I'm a bit of a runner, do weights, Man U fan, Belinda Carlisle, bit of rock. That's me.
Should we cut the stream now that I've just found out you're a Man U fan? Although I did know that. How are they going to be affected with the whole football scenario right now?
Oh, we're talking about football. Oh, good.
Well, for a moment,
it's absolutely amazing, isn't it, that Liverpool could actually be denied a title having waited 30 years. So that brings a smile to my face. And Leeds might not get promoted. We're alienating half our listeners now. Or they'll throw them out.
So I'm a Liverpool fan, so it's even worse. What's Paul? How's it been for you for what is it, 6 weeks we've been in lockdown now? It's odd times, isn't it?
So I wasn't. I'm not the most techie savvy or literate, and I've been used to having people around me in an office to show me how to do things on screen or how to get this or that up or attach things. So it's been quite a steep learning curve for me, and that's I've not been used to working at home. And when I have worked at home, it's tended to be just cabining up with a pile of documents to be not disturbed. So I've decided to take half a day off to work from home to look at a document file, but not with a view to being in contact with anybody, to be deliberately not in contact with people. So my working from home has been very different before. And now, of course, everybody's all connected. So I found it quite difficult in the beginning, even attaching leads to the right sockets for a printer and a scanner. And I get quite anxious and stressed when things don't work and I can't fix them myself. So I rely on others in the office to do that, and it's very bad because I should have been really set up for this before now. But I don't think I'm in a too small a minority. It doesn't matter how old you are either.
But if anything, I guess it's upskilling us all, and from if we look at some of the positives, it's put you in a position where you've had to upskill a bit on the technical front, I guess, and opened up new ways of working potentially.
Well, I've started to think that when we return to some degree of normality, when we're back in the office, that lots of people, including myself, might decide to choose a day or two a week to work from home, because we've now got used to the systems. And of course, you save on traffic, you save on petrol, you save on time. So once you are up and running, I think it will work for a lot of people. A lot of people, of course, are working from home. They've not got a full office. They're at a kitchen table, they're in the back bedroom, they're in the attic, or whatever. So it's not an office. And even things like you forgot to bring the stapler home, or paper clips, or just very mundane things like that. It's quite frustrating, and you can't just nip into the office to get something.
Absolutely.
So it will change the view whether they have to be in the office. Because for people like us who don't make things, or don't cut people's hair, or they're not dentists having to have people in front of you, most of the time we don't need to be in an office and in front of people physically.
Yeah, so, totally. So some of the topics that we're going to be covering today are around furlough, around redundancies, around restructuring, around annual holidays. We also need to think of the employees as well. A lot of your work actually involves working on behalf of employees. That's around settlement agreements. Is that right?
Yes, most of the employee advice I give is to people who have been presented with a settlement agreement or have requested one and partly negotiated themselves. And this is a document which requires them to have a solicitor who advises them on it and who is identified and signs off on the document. And that can range from a simple sign off where they've said, look, I've agreed all this, you need to sign it, from people wanting me to step in to bat for them and negotiate and argue their case, because they might be receiving a proposal they don't want to accept. So it's very important to ensure at the outset, look, is this amicable, or are you actually contesting this from the start?
And potentially what we are going to see is a rise in redundancy or settlement agreements over this period, because we might not get into it right now, but we're going to talk about how different businesses are using furlough in different ways. So there could be a bit of a rise right now. What I'm interested in is what you talk to a lot of businesses, you give a lot of employment law advice. What are the issues that you're finding that people are asking you right now? What are the key things that people are wanting help with?
From an employer perspective, the employer clients that I have, and I've had some of these clients I've had for 20 years or more, they are very concerned about the immediate future when people are coming back from lockdown. Some are already considering restructuring, and despite the assistance of furlough from the government, this job retention scheme, they are still looking at the potential and actively now embarking upon redundancy programs. They're also concerned about the backlog of holiday accruals, which will cause problems later in terms of having people in the office doing the work when everybody's accrued all this holiday, because people at the moment may not want to go on or take holiday when they can't go anywhere, and people that have got holidays booked want to cancel, and of course they want to carry over. Employers will want to kind of flatline that to make sure that they have people in the office, or they have people at work when they need them, and that everybody doesn't suddenly want to go on holiday. So that's caused a few problems, because you cannot, as a matter of law, trade holiday for cash except on the termination of employment. So you can't have somebody say, well, if I relinquish 2 weeks holiday, can I be paid instead? You can't do that. You can't do it lawfully. You can only pay in lieu of holidays accrued on termination of employment, which seems in some ways unworkable. And of course, we haven't had this before, so it's never been raised before, because generally people want to take their holidays, and most people don't have enough holiday in their eyes to take. Whereas at the moment, they're storing up holiday.
Just to remind everyone that's watching, if you do have questions, please do ask. Please put them in the chat. If you're watching this on replay, put a hashtag replay. It'll be good to know. You just talked about holiday there, and I'm not sure if I misunderstood or the question. So with regard to the you can't pay people to relinquish their holidays, that as an employer, am I not able to, if an employee doesn't want to take a week off, I can't pay them to work that week? Is that not the case?
Well, if they don't want to take their time off, if an employee for some reason doesn't use up all their holiday in a given holiday year, and let's take an example of a calendar year being January to December, most people who work full time get 5 weeks holiday, and plus bank holidays, so they get 25 days plus the 8 bank holidays. If they don't take them all, they can't say, well, can I be paid instead? Can I trade in 2 weeks holiday for extra pay? Because this is paid holiday anyway, so it's a lump sum on top of the holiday pay that they would have received whilst on holiday. So when somebody leaves their employment, if they leave on the 30th of June, so halfway through that holiday year, and at which point they may have accrued 12 days, so it's approximately 2 days a month. If they've taken 8 days, they're paid in lieu of the 4. So they receive, most people on termination will receive a payment in lieu of holidays that have accrued but not been taken, and that's the only time which they can be paid that in cash.
And even if the employer agreed and wanted them to work, would so there couldn't be a mutual agreement between both employer and employee?
I suspect that there probably is in practice.
Yeah.
Because if no one complains about anything, then it never comes to the attention of a ruling authority. So there must be behind the scenes agreements which take place every day, whether they are lawfully binding or not.
Interesting. I actually never knew that myself. So but with regard to the situation right now, with regard to holiday, the danger, I think, is what you're saying, is that if when businesses open, or when they get busy again, the danger is that you've got members of staff that have accrued a lot of holiday and want to take the holiday. And so what you're talking about is to consider either moving some of that holiday, or to, in some way, coming up with an agreement for staff, for employees to take some holiday during furlough. Is that correct?
Yes. So to give you an example, the government announced about 3 or 4 weeks ago that they would allow, employees would be permitted, and they were entitled as of right to carry over up to 4 weeks holiday for the next 2 years. Now, the interesting questions around that, where they weren't able to take their holiday because of the coronavirus crisis, but it's weren't able, not chose not to. So, there may be arguments which rage in the future about whether somebody was able to, but they just chose not to. So, but businesses, I've got clients looking at this now, so that they're wanting to reach agreement now with their employees that in this holiday year, for example, they'll be able to carry over, for example, up to 2 weeks into next year, but any more than 2 weeks will be lost. And this will apply, and it's whether you make a distinction between clients who are on employees who are on furlough and those who are not. So people on furlough are effectively on holiday, aren't they? Because they're being paid maybe at 80%, but they're being paid to do nothing. And it seems that, whether there's going to be furlough envy creeping in from their colleagues who are working, who want to be given priority to take holidays when the lockdown is lifted. And because those on furlough could be told or asked, actually, whilst you're on furlough leave, we want you to take a week's holiday, which won't break their furlough period. The only thing it will change is their pay, because the holiday pay has to be at their normal rate of pay. So somebody sitting at home on furlough is suddenly asked to take a week's holiday, and they say, well, what's the point? I can't go anywhere. It makes no difference. but holiday accrues during furlough, of course. So when they come off furlough, and at the moment we don't know when furlough is going to end. Currently, it's ending at the end of June, but I suspect it will be extended. So people who are on furlough are still accruing holidays. People who are working are accruing holidays. Those people who are working in the same business might think they should be given priority treatment for holiday requests when things go back to normal, whatever normal is. And I've been devising policies with clients around that area, and where employers are asking employees to agree that certain things will change. For example, the carryover of holiday, build-up of holiday, making requests, cancelling holiday that's already been booked. Because if you're an employee that's booked 2 weeks holiday to go to Spain in July, you're not going to go. So you might want to cancel that. But cancelling your 2 weeks then gives you another 2 weeks to take later in the year. And people will have the odd days booked, which isn't a problem. But it's when somebody's got their 2 week fortnight in the summer booked that they now want to cancel.
Do you have any? You talked about furlough envy there. Are there any practical tips that you've come across that to try and avoid that?
Not. I've got a client who's got two members of staff who effectively job share. One of them is on furlough, the other one isn't. The one who isn't has now got increased childcare and caring responsibilities because their partner is still working, and they were asking their employer, hang on, why is Tracy on furlough and I'm not? Can we not rotate it? So because they're both being paid, I think the employer is topping up in this situation. So They're both being paid the same. One is working, the other one isn't. So the one who is working is a bit envious of the one who isn't.
Of course.
And why wouldn't you be? Some people, of course, take the opposite view, that they would rather be occupied and busy and contributing. And if you're on a career path in your own mind, that you might feel that if you're carrying on working, you're more valued as an employee, because that's why they want you working. Whereas the furloughed people might feel, rightly or wrongly, that they're not as needed as others. So I think the furloughed people need to be cosseted and nurtured and made aware that they're still valued employees and they will still be needed at some stage in the future. But will they?
Yeah, well, that's the question, isn't it? And I think you make a very valid point around trying to ensure that you get across that you how much you value your employees that are furloughed, because I can only imagine that they really will be feeling quite anxious about whether whether they are valued and whether their job's secure.
Yeah, I mean, we have a number of furloughed employees, and we ensure that they are invited and kept up to date, receive emails. Of course, one of the issues about furlough is you're not allowed to do any work, so you couldn't really be logging on. It's a very, very difficult area, this, but you're not allowed to do any work which produces revenue for the employer or provides a service. So a furloughed employee is not logging on. So therefore, you need to make sure as an employer that you have a personal email address to keep them up to date with things. Yeah. And invite them to Zoom meetings, invite them to sessions, any social events that are organised through work, which are online, of course, now involve everybody, whether furloughed or not. And the longer people are on furlough, there's this the adage, out of sight, out of mind. So they need to be visible and, I suppose, keep involved.
Yeah. The just a last question from me on annual leave. So if I'm a business that is not seeing that sales are going to be suddenly coming in when lockdown is over, and I think there's a lot of sectors and industries, unfortunately, in that position. So if I don't feel that there's going to be lots of sales coming, in some way, would I be better not to push for holiday? Because if I was to push for holiday, it would cost me an extra 20%. And if I don't think I'm going to need my staff, then I'd be better having some of that holiday available later and it would save me the 20% extra. Am I right with thinking about that way?
You might need to do some number crunching, because the top up, if you pay them holiday pay, you've got to pay. They're entitled to the normal rate of pay on holidays. So if you're not topping up, if you're sticking at 80% or the cap on furlough, then if you require people to take holidays, you've got to pay them at their full rate. So okay, but if you don't, and you think, well, I'll save that 20%, staff then accrue their holidays, and if you then unfortunately later on have to make redundancies or have to terminate, you will have to pay that holiday at the end of their employment, because you have to pay in lieu of accrued holidays not taken. So, and that will be at their full rate of pay. So there isn't really there may be, if you do, I don't know, somebody might create an algorithm to calculate what is the optimum time to terminate or not grant holidays, but you have to pay it one way or the other.
So if there's
award it one way or the other.
So if there's any thought of a potential redundancy with someone, then that's where you would consider holiday more. If you're sort of adamant that you won't be making a redundancy, but you just think you won't need them quite as much, then that would be a way of potentially saving 20%.
Yes, I suppose. One of the other interesting issues around furlough is long-term absentees on long-term sick, because I've had a client who had somebody off on long-term sick, and that person had exhausted their contractual or occupational sick pay. They'd gone on to SSP or disability, and that person was saying, well, can I now notionally come back to work and be placed on furlough? Because that way they would get 80% as opposed to their SSP or their disability benefit. Wow. And the employer, of course, could agree to that, because the government reimburses the employer. So there are ways and means of exploiting furlough.
Wow.
But you have, for example, somebody on maternity leave who has exhausted so on maternity leave you get, normally statutory schemes, you get 90%, 6 weeks at 90%, and then 39 weeks at SNP rate. And if you want that, you might, however, choose to return early. So you notionally say, I want to come back early, and just put me on furlough. So an early maternist from maternity leave can go on furlough and receive more pay than they would have been at their SNP rate. But the catch is that once they've gone back, they can't go up again. Yeah. But and of course, if furlough ends, then they're scuppered. But interesting. Not had anyone surprised yet.
So you talked about how you can use furlough in different ways, and one of the big topics that I think, correct me if I'm wrong, some of the businesses that you've been talking to are around restructuring and redundancy, and are we correct in saying that you can use furlough as part of the notice period for redundancy?
Yes. So there is no. So when somebody's on furlough leave, their employment is continuing as normal. The only change is that the government is effectively reimbursing the employer under this grant scheme. So if you have X number of staff on furlough, and some businesses, don't forget, have got pretty much all their staff on furlough. So if you're a restaurant or a business which it suddenly stops manufacturing, stops producing, the factory is shut down, all of your staff are on furlough, bar a couple of admin people, for example, or in IT or accounts. So if you're then looking at restructuring and you decide as an employer that you're not going to need them all in the future, then you start to select, and redundancy selection processes are a different topic all on their own, but you select, you consult. If you then identify those that you wish to make redundant, and they're entitled to their periods of notice, then of course that notice period can be whilst they're on furlough. And I have a client now at the moment who is utilising the period between now and the end of June, which is the end of the current furlough, the current expiry date for furlough. He's using the period between now and the end of June to pay out the notice periods, or using the 80% to pay out their notice periods for redundancy. What they may do, he said, is that if furlough is extended further, he may even decide to tell the employees, actually, we'll extend your termination date. We're still making you redundant, but we'll extend your termination date because the government has extended furlough. So whilst furlough is in existence, we may as well just have these employees continue their employment, albeit under notice of termination.
And you can see, right? Wow.
There's no reason why you can't do that. That I can think of, and the government scheme, although there have been several iterations of the guidance, it doesn't change the general rules of employment law. So if you make someone redundant, generally, you might decide to give them more notice than they're entitled to. And so if you have a scheme which pays you or reimburses you 80%, and you feel sorry for the employees that you're having to let go or terminate, then why not use that scheme to give them some more money?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. In previous conversations, we've talked about some of your clients, obviously not going into too much detail, but there was a client with a couple of holiday parks that were anticipating massive reductions. What was some of the assistance you've been talking about there?
They have a couple of holiday parks, but they also manufacture and install log cabins for other parks, and so they have two arms to the business. And of course, they're concerned that people that those parks may not reopen, that they may be closed for a longer period than other businesses. So their summer bookings are effectively obliterated, and people that don't tend to go to these places in the winter, or there's a reduced booking. So they're already looking at reduced numbers. I've got another client who supplies and parts and fits out coaches and essentially services coaches. Now, the holiday industry, the coaching industry, people aren't going to be piling onto coaches for some time to come. So they're seriously worried that their order book is going to be massively reduced. So the leisure industry and the holiday sector is going to be particularly hard hit.
So some of the methods that can be used, correct me if I'm wrong. So there are alternatives to redundancy, and you might be able to put something in place before you got to that. So there's things like, correct me if I'm right. There's things like reductions in pay. There's short time working, varied T&Cs. Talk us through some of those things so that we've got.
So it is interesting, this, because with what you cannot do is you cannot do a combination of furlough and short time working. So for example, people who you either use furlough or you don't. So if you don't use furlough, what you can of course do, and it requires consent to change terms and conditions. So you might decide that you want people to go part-time or short-time and pay them accordingly. And that requires careful handling, because you're then saying to the employees, we don't require you all of the time, we require you to reduce your hours. So we'll pay you accordingly. So that's a reduction in pay for the employee. And of course, they might agree to it, or they might agree to have deferred pay. So they're not being paid now, but it's being stored up for later. And that's dangerous for the employer, because they won't necessarily know if they can afford to pay that deferred salary at some later date. So deferred pay is not too clever in many ways, because it requires careful handling. So if somebody going on short time or part time has a reduction in pay. Now, if you're an employee, you might agree to that, but my advice would be you agree to it for a limited period and then a review, and it reverts back unless you agree for it to continue. Because otherwise you agree to go on short time or reduced pay, and you can't get back again because the employer doesn't agree to put you back. And once you've agreed a variation, then it's fixed until the parties agree to unfix it. And the employer might decide not to unfix it. So as an employee, you're on reduced salary from now on.
And I understand that you can't mix and match and do it with furlough, but you could do it coming out of furlough if you've still not got the business and the volume.
Yes, I think if the furlough scheme is ended or is reduced in some capacity, because it may, of course, it's currently 80% or a cap of 2,500, it might reduce, who knows. So employers might decide, if they don't have the safety net of furlough or something similar, to look at reduced hours, short time working, and also use layoff, which is a statutory scheme, which it's not that common now, but a layoff scheme is where the employer says it's almost a halfway house to redundancy. So it's a temporary measure to combat reductions in workloads and customer requirements. So you ask employees to stay at home, you pay them a guarantee rate, which is a very small amount, but it can only be used for a certain limited period, so 4 weeks or 6 in 13 weeks, for example. And at the end of that period, an employee can say, I'm not agreeing to be laid off any further, I now want a redundancy payment. And they have to consent in the first place to lay off. It's not that common anymore. It used to be, but it may come back into its own.
So I mean, just from a layman's point of view, the potential scenarios, because I think that what businesses need to do is do some scenario planning and think about, well, okay, if this happens, this is what we could do. If this happens, this is what we could do. The sort of the couple of potential things in my mind are that if I I'm reasonably sure that I'm not going to be making redundancies, but at the same time, I know that I'm not going to have lots of business. One method, I guess, would be furlough, then lay off, then short time working, and then I've got to start employing them normally. Alternatively, if I think redundancies are going to happen, the sooner I do that, the better, because I can use furlough for some of the notice period. Does that, from my point of view, does that sound?
Yes. The other thing you need to be, as an employee, you have to keep an eye on is the clock of continuous service, because once somebody hits 2 years service, so it's technically 1 year, 51 weeks, they acquire the rights for unfair dismissal. So if you're a business looking at redundancy and you've got 10 staff, for example, 10 machine operators, and you identify that you need to have 7 of them going forward, so you're choosing 3 from 10, for example, you might draw up a list of selection criteria and score people on a matrix, and those who the lowest scores are then at risk. And of course, no one wants to come out bottom, so the person with the lowest scores will always complain. If you decide that you've got 3 or 4 people with less than 2 years service, and they are the people you might want to lose, then you can select them automatically because they don't qualify to bring a claim. So if you've got people approaching 2 years and you've got one eye on the next 3 months and you're thinking about making redundancies, you may as well capitalize, if you like, on the fact that if you select those people with under 2 years, then you're reducing your liability exposure for unfair dismissal claims. One warning there is that you need to make sure that there is no suggestion that they have been selected for other reasons which might be discriminatory. So sex, race, disability, age, etc. And also part-time employees, because part-timers have legislation which protects them from treatment which is less favourable because they are part-time. And I had a client yesterday that wants to make a lady redundant in their organisation, and he said to me, "Well, she's managed to negotiate these hours for herself with the last factory manager who's now gone. I never liked it anyway. I want full-time people. I'm going to make her redundant because she's the only part-timer." And I said, "You cannot mention that she's part-time, because that is blatant breach of the part-timers less favourable treatment regulation. So you need to be very careful about the way you treat different categories of employees." But generally, the 2-year rule is pretty much entrenched in employment law. But so you might have an eye on the calendar.
You talked about redundancy. I can't remember the word you used, selection or the criteria, etc. Unfortunately, and I'm sure you must see this day in, day out, a lot of businesses haven't had the HR and the employment law things in place for many years. Don't do regular one-to-ones and objective setting and all sorts of different things. So if you're in a position where you've got, let's say 5-10 staff, and they've all served more than 2 years, how does the whole redundancy selection work when you've not got any evidence at all?
Well, so you have, you can use, you should set up a number of criteria which are meant to be objective and capable of measurement and some with some degree of accuracy. So you might, for example, in the old days, you had LIFO, which is last in, first out. So you might choose those who were last in, and that is completely objective. Doesn't always leave you with the staff that you want to be left with. So that's very rudimentary. So you may then start to use absentee records, so absenteeism, sickness records, timekeeping. If people clock in and out, you may want to use you may use disciplinary records. If you then start, you may have qualifications or skill sets. You may be able to measure output from people in certain organizations, so you can test how productive, how efficient people are. But you're right that sometimes you may have no records or audit trails of what people are doing, how they've been measured, and you run into the realms of subjective assessment. Well, Marie's better than Hillary at doing this. Well, how do you know she is? Well, I just think she just gives me less problems. Or John in accounts takes longer than Simon to do the monthly returns. He just does. So he's not as efficient. Well, how when you set this out to the employees and they object, you don't have the backup. So those employees are going to face some difficult challenges, because an employment tribunal, if you get to one, will require employers to have used a system which is transparent and fair and open to some level of scrutiny.
Well, sorry, go on.
No, typically when you have you have a scoring matrix. So you set up a number. I've done a couple of these last week with clients. So you set up, you've got 5 or 6 categories, criteria. They're scored by a line manager, and they might be scored by another manager, and the scores are then aggregated. And that avoids allegations of bias. Well, he never liked me anyway, so he scored me low for that, and I don't agree. And one thing to avoid things like attitude and flexibility, because somebody might be less flexible because they have caring responsibilities or childcare responsibilities, which is then a form of discrimination. Yeah. So you need to be careful about the criteria that you choose. But somebody is scored, at the bottom of the pile, they will automatically want to, the self-preservation kicks in, want to argue that they should have got a higher score, and they might want to see the scores of others. So they get their own score, but not necessarily the scores of everybody else, because that's confidential. So you have these arguments as well as to what extent you send them, everybody gets everybody's scores, whether you send a chart which is anonymized A, B, C, D, E, F, and you're F at the bottom, so you're selected. You want to know who's above you. You also want to know how many points you need to get to go above the threshold to be saved.
Wow. Interestingly, you brought up last in, first out. So that's good to know that you can use things like that. Can you use salaries? So, for example, if Joe has a lower salary, it's therefore going to cost me less on redundancy. Is that a fair argument or not?
I think you can in a sophisticated way. So because you might decide, for example, that somebody has become too expensive, and that somebody else who is paid less can do the same job. And so what you can do in those situations is have a restructure and invite them both to apply for another position. So you sometimes have reverse selection. So you say to the affected pool of candidates or employees, we're going to restructure. There are 5 positions. There are 5 of you at the moment. We only need 3 of you. So you can all apply for these 3 new jobs. and these are going to be the salaries and the terms and conditions. So you can have an element of that. That can also be extended to allow for external candidates to apply for those jobs as well. So you're allowed to pick the best person for those new jobs, or the jobs in the new regime, from your existing workforce, and also from external candidates who you may wish to recruit. And I've had examples of that where it's been very difficult for someone to swallow that they've been doing this job for the last 5 years without any real complaints or hiccups. The job in the restructured job, it looks the same, it feels the same, but it's got a different title. Why can't I now do it as well as I've been doing? And why can somebody else who comes in do it better than me when they've not even been doing the job anyway? So salaries might be an issue, and you might say to somebody, well, we can't afford to pay you this anymore. This is the proposal. We can reduce your salary, or we can reduce your hours, or an option is redundancy, or you might decide to have what's called a protected conversation with somebody, which is without prejudice, and offer them a settlement agreement to go. And if they choose it, that's fine. If they don't, and you ultimately select them for redundancy, they cannot then adduce evidence of the offer behind the scenes without prejudice.
You've got a quite a wide range mix of clients, haven't you? Just give us some examples, just so we can get into the mindset of the type of clients that you serve. I think it's quite wide, is it not?
Yeah, so I've got clients I've got retailers with 70 or 80 shops. I've got manufacturing clients. So I've got a client who manufactures and fits out pubs and signage for pubs and restaurants. I've got clients who fit out high-end kitchens and fireplaces. IT clients who, I've got a client in London who is a big organizer of events and exhibitions. And of course, they are struggling because everything's being cancelled and postponed. So they organize events, with huge numbers of people attending and huge teams behind the scenes, setting up stages, setting up exhibition centres, not just in the UK, but abroad. And so that they've really had to look at things very carefully, and they've furloughed most of their staff. And I've got small clients who run, a business with 2 or 3 staff, where the directors are also heavily involved in the business on a day-to-day basis, but they have a very small number of staff, and they use a lot of contractors. So they have people they engage as contractors, not employees.
But I'm guessing you also have small businesses where they don't even have contractors as well.
Yes. So you just simply have 5 or 6 employees within a business.
Yeah. This has been really, really helpful, and I think we've covered a lot of topics. I'm not sure if there was anything we missed. I think we covered it all. Is there any final point you want to get across? If I'm a business, is there something that I should definitely have in place, or something I should thought of, or what's the tip on trying to plan for this stronger recovery and being in a safer place? Any final words of wisdom?
I think that if you're an employer, you have to remember that the biggest resource you have is your staff, and they have the capacity to drag you out of the mire or pull you down into it. And you get somebody told me a story once about is it time to get for someone to get off the bus, or we're all on the coach together going to the seaside, or are we actually going down a tunnel? Is the light at the end of the tunnel, or is that light the headlamp of an oncoming train? Who do you want with you in that situation? People go to work for various reasons. It depends on your philosophy. Some people go to work to mix, and a lot of people are struggling working at home because they like being at work amongst people, and I'm one of those. I'm not particularly a fan of being at home alone, but I think if you're an employer, you need to be having staff on side, because the last thing you want when you're trying to get the business back on its feet is staff who are disgruntled and have felt disaffected by the way they've been treated whilst in lockdown or on furlough. But it might be time for a clear out. Some employers may be thinking, well, this has given me the opportunity to see who's really pulling in the right direction, who's actually stepped up to the plate, and who do I want back with me when things are on the up again.
It's an opportunity, isn't it? It really is. Paul, if we wanted to find out more, to speak to you, to get a bit more advice, to engage you, how would we find you?
You can contact me by mobile 07932 173 666. Email is paulg@winstonsolicitors.co.uk. Ring the office, ring my mobile, email me.
And the main website is winstonsolicitors.co.uk, and you'll be under the employment law tab, I assume.
Yeah.
Yep, brilliant. It's been really, really helpful. For those that have watched, and if it's been helpful, please comment or like or share. We'll be doing some more live Q&As. I know Nikki's got some coming up next week. I've got another one coming up as well. And if you're not in the Facebook group, it's the Coronavirus Yorkshire Business Support Group. Thanks so much, Paul. Let you say goodbye.
Bye. It's been interesting to talk to somebody from a different perspective and share some stories as well. So.
Yeah, it's been really helpful. Thank you. I really appreciate it. So it's bye from us, and we will see you next time. And stay safe and good luck. You've been listening to the Johnny Ross audio experience. Thanks so much for joining me. If you want to continue the conversation, head over to my website, fleek.marketing, or find me on LinkedIn. That's all for today. Please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, tag me in your social media posts, and please leave me a review on iTunes. It will make a huge difference for me. I will see you soon.